Sometimes Nobel Prizes in literature go to writers who are past their time. Sometimes people even talk about the Nobel curse, but that curse does not apply to this Polish novelist, as proved by her latest book that really makes you think about gender, power, and horror in history, and it changes your perspective on a magical German 100-year novel, also by a Nobel laureate. It gives you a whole new angle, literally, from which to think about who and what drove the tragedies, 20th and 21st century history. I'm Jeff Rich, this is The Burning Archive, and this is my book recommendation video on Olga Tokarczuk's The Empusium, a health resort horror story. Don't worry if you don't know what an Empusium is. I didn't when I bought the book or read the book until I was part way in, and that is part of the fun of this really wonderful novel by Olga Tokarczuk. Part of the joy of this novel is discovering what its title means. Olga Tokarczuk won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2018 after a scandal in the Nobel Committee about sex and gender. And since her Nobel Prize, 2 books of hers have been released in English. The brilliant The Books of Jacob, I think the best historical fiction novel of the 20th century, even better than Wolf Hall. And I'll be talking about that on the channel soon. And the latest, The Empusium, a health resort horror story. It is a horror story. It is a historical novel. It is a novel of ideas, and it plays with genre and gender. It is a homage to The Magic Mountain, the famous 100-year-old classic novel that is on many people's to-read list, but hasn't always been read by people. It is a homage that flips that great book, which I'm actually rereading now, partly because I read The Empusium. It flips it on its head in all sorts of ways. What is the story of The Empusium? The Empusium is set in 1913 in a health resort, a sanatorium in Poland. It centres on a young man, Mieczysław Wojtnitz. Apologies if I have not pronounced that well. It's the best I can do. Mieczysław Wojtnitz. He's young, a bit naive and shy, and sick, it seems, with tuberculosis. He retreats to the mountains, as people often did, as they did in Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain. That is also set in 1913 on the cusp of World War I, in a sanatorium. In Davos, actually. But Mieczysław retreats to the mountains to a dwelling adjacent to the sanatorium known as the Guest House for Gentlemen, based on a real place in Poland, just as Mann's book was based on a real sanatorium in wherever Davos is. I guess it's Switzerland or Austria, but in the Germanic world in that era. But Mieczysław is a bit uptight and dislikes people looking at his body. They all the residents drink a mysterious hallucinogenic liquor made in the local forests. And they are observed from below by some mysterious narrators who speak to us in the narration. The narrators of the story. There are these loving details of a view from below, from beneath the floorboards almost, as so to speak, looking at loving details that you would only ever see if you were looking up from the floorboards, like shoes. And we sense these underground or even repressed observers are the reason the book is called a horror story. And we're given a clue to that end by the quotation at the start of the book, the epigram, which is by the great Portuguese writer, poet, novelist of sort, Fernando Pessoa, in his The Book of Disquiet. Every day things happen in the world that can't be explained by any law of things we know. Every day they're mentioned and forgotten, and the same mystery that brought them takes them away, transforming their secret into oblivion. Such is the law by which things that can't be explained must be forgotten. The visible world goes on as usual in the broad daylight. Otherness watches us from the shadows. And we soon realise that the narration of this book is from those shadows, from that otherness. As the story progresses, just as in Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, the residents debate the most important, almost philosophical questions of the day. But they are nearly all men, or so it seems. There were no declarations of gender pronouns in Poland in 1913. But most of all, they are obsessed by gender too, but by being obsessively scornful and dismissive of women. They debate questions like, are women's brains really smaller than men's? Of course, Tokarczuk is presenting these ideas ironically. She is parodying the very common expression of these ideas in, Western literary traditions. Mann's Magic Mountain similarly is full of ironic dialogues debating the ideas prevalent in Europe on the cusp of World War I. But Tokarczuk presents a very different set of debates, to those that Mann presents. And remember, in 1913, women's suffrage was being debated all around the world. The woman question was a big public debate issue, not least within literature. So you do need to read Tokarczuk with a sense of the irony that she's deploying and not, trigger warnings, I guess. But her book then follows those debates and explores the emergence of the true character or characters of Mieczysław Woźnich throughout the story. And it culminates in an absolutely brilliant conclusion, I think, that I'm not going to spoil for you. But let me read the first page or so, just so you get a sense of the style of Tokarczuk's wonderful prose, beautifully translated by, in this case, Antonia Lloyd-Jones. You get a sense of the style of Tokarczuk and her ability, almost from the first sentence of the novel, to draw you into a psychological drama, as well as a playful literary novel. And so this is from page 1, The Guest House for Gentlemen. The view is obscured by clouds of steam from the locomotive that trail along the platform. To see everything, we must look beneath them. Let ourselves be momentarily blinded by the grey haze until the vision that emerges after this trial run is sharp, incisive, and all-seeing. Then we shall catch sight of the platform flagstones, squares overgrown with stalks of feeble little plants, a space trying at any cost to keep order and symmetry. Soon after, a left shoe appears on them, brown, leather, not brand new, and is immediately joined by a second right shoe. This one looks even shabbier. Its toe is rather scuffed, and there are some lighter patches on the upper. For a moment the shoes stand still indecisively, but then the left one advances. This movement briefly exposes a black cotton sock beneath a trouser leg. Black recurs in the tails of an unbuttoned wool coat. The day is warm. A small hand, pale and bloodless, holds a brown leather suitcase. The weight has caused the veins to tense, and now they indicate their source somewhere deep inside the bowels of the sleeve. Under the coat we glimpse a flannel jacket of rather poor quality, slightly crumpled by the long journey and marked by tiny bright dots of some non-specific impurity, the world's chaff. The white collar of a shirt is visible too, the button-on kind, evidently changed quite recently because its whiteness is fresher than the white of the actual shirt, and contrasts with the sallow tone of the traveller's face. Pale eyes, eyebrows and eyelashes make this face look unhealthy. Against the deep red of the western sky, the whole figure gives the unsettling impression of having arrived here in these melancholy mountains from the world beyond. And then the narrative goes on in a way that would be very familiar to readers of Thomas Mann's great novel, The Magic Mountain. Now, let's talk about the reactions and reviews to Olga Tokarczuk's book, and I'll give you my rating on the book as well. I think the Hindustan Times has captured my feelings about the book best, describing it as having a brilliant pace that grips the reader's attention. The Nobel Prize winner's latest novel does not have a moment of dullness. And I've given you a full quote in the video. There are a few YouTube videos that feature Tokarczuk talking about the novel, the Empusium, but I have not found one yet where Olga Tokarczuk's words are translated into English, even on the YouTube auto-translate. There are a few wet blanket reviews out there. I wouldn't pay too much attention to them. My reading is that this novel, The Empusium, really does show Tokarczuk's mastery as a visionary storyteller, her sophistication in thinking about history and, I guess, social issues, the subtlety of her character portraits, and the depth of her understanding of some of the more complex reaches of psychology and the way our stories create ourselves. And last of all, the strength of her vision. She is a very strong activist on a whole range of issues, but the strength of her vision to change concepts of gender that govern writing, literature and history. And she packages all that serious thought, literature and gender politics into a brilliant, ironic, homage parody of one of the great novels of the 20th century, The Magic Mountain. It shows her literary playfulness in blending genres and maybe also genders. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. It would make a great Christmas or New Year season summer beach reading here in Australia present. especially if one of your friends or relatives is interested in questions of gender, or would like to read a version of the Magic Mountain without reading all, well, whatever it is, 700 odd pages of Thomas Mann's novel. Now, let me just comment on 3 issues that also might help you or your friend orient yourself to this book. First of all, the link to the Magic Mountain. It is a homage or a flip of the Magic Mountain, but you don't need to have read the Magic Mountain. You'll appreciate all sorts of aspects of the book more if you have read the Magic Mountain, or if you, like me, decide to reread the Magic Mountain after reading the Empusium. And a lot of people give up on the Magic Mountain because of its sort of long dialogues between certain key characters, Settembrini and Nafta. But any reader of the Magic Mountain would pick up the correspondences and the variations in Olga Tokarczuk's book. She makes, I think, quite a lot of fun with it. I mean, in the Magic Mountain, Thomas Mann's version, there's a character called Nafta who is based, to some degree at least, on the Hungarian communist Marxist philosopher Olga Tokarczuk. And in Olga Tokarczuk's novel, The Magic Mountain, and Olga Tokarczuk grew up in communist Poland. She would absolutely have known Lukács's literary criticism. There is a philosopher character called Georgi and a Catholic traditionalist character, both to some degree reincarnations of the Nafta character in Thomas Mann. The Catholic traditionalist is called Lucas. There's also a Frau Brecht, as in Bertolt Brecht's, I don't know, wife, sister, daughter, mother, and a Frau Weber, as in Max Weber. And there are some similar events as well. So, but a lot of deviation in ideas and plot and other things. It's a lot more funny, I think, or a lot more 21st century funny than Thomas Mann's novel, which is funny too, but in an early 20th century way. And the story moves at a more rollicking pace and is about half or a third of the length. It's much, much more than I think one critic said, like a feminist takedown of the Magic Mountain. I think it is a much, much better and it's more of a homage, I think, less than a takedown. And indeed, Olga Tokarczuk has spoken in the past about the importance of this novel, The Magic Mountain, to her as well, including, I think, in her Nobel lecture, The Tender Narrator, which you can actually listen to an audio of me reading Olga Tokarczuk's The Tender Narrator Nobel lecture at my Substack, jeffrich.substack.com, if you become a paid subscriber. The second key point to orient you is around gender. As I said, gender is at the heart of this story, and the debates and some of the ideas presented, the sort of early 20th and literary traditions ideas about gender that are presented in the novel, are presented ironically, but if you're so make sure you don't get too angry or annoyed that these ideas are expressed. I think it will be pretty clear the humour and the irony and the send-up that Olga Tokarczuk is making of this novel. At the end of the novel, she actually lists all the authors from the Western literary tradition who are parodied or critiqued in her wonderful pastiches of their philosophical ideas about women. And they include Augustine of Hippo, Bernard of Cluny, William S. Burroughs, Cato, Joseph Conrad, Charles Darwin, Emil Durkheim, Henry Fielding, Sigmund Freud, H. Rider Haggard, Hesiod, Jack Kerouac, D.H. Lawrence, Cesare Lombroso, leading like a psychiatrist from the late 19th century, helped define forensic psychiatry. W. Somerset Maugham, John Milton, Friedrich Nietzsche, again a big influence on Thomas Mann, Ovid, Plato, Ezra Pound, Jean Racine, Francois de la Rochefoucauld, Jean-Paul Sartre, another winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, whose profile you can read if you join my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com, become a paid subscriber, and you'll get access to my complete Nobel archive of all 121 Nobel Prizes for Literature. Arthur Schopenhauer, Simonides of Amorgus, no idea who that is, William Shakespeare, August Strindberg, Jonathan Swift, Algernon Charles Swinburne, Tertullian, the sort of theologian, Thomas Aquinas, Richard Wagner, John Webster, Frank Wedekind, Otto Weininger, and William Butler Yeats, also another Nobel Prize winner. So gender also emerges in the Empusium through the title. The Empusia are female spirits. This is explained in the book. It's not too much of a spoiler, I hope. And as the novel progresses, you wonder if it is indeed these female spirits who are the narrators of the novel. This is also something Olga Tokarczuk did absolutely brilliantly in this novel, playing with both gender and the narrative voice through the character of Yenti in the Books of Jacob. It is central, gender that is central to the character plot of Mstislav Voznitz, who is shy and careful about not letting people see his body. Gender in many ways replaces the central debates of Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain between liberalism and communism, between idealism and materialism, I guess, all sorts of up in the clouds debates, with an earlier debate about how gender has shaped the history of the 20th century, the history of many centuries, including our own, how perhaps the ideas about gender expressed in this sanatorium were part of the conditioning cultural circumstances that led to the male violence and power in this central story of the 20th century, World War I, and all the other terrible things that happened then. The third point I think that's worth emphasising is, Olga Tokarczuk is a great Polish writer. Her book, The Books of Jacob, which I will do a video on the channel before too long, is steeped in Polish history, or let's say East European and Slavic history, and all the many cultures, languages, religions, nations that made their homes in that part of the world. She celebrates the whole plurality of that. And she also, I think, plays with various reversals of traditional Germanic views of Polish or Slavic culture. When you read Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain, this is so in your face. There are various Slavic characters. There's lots and lots and lots of references to, Tatar physiognomy and all this kind of thing. And in Germany, in Poland in the 1920s, in Germany, West European culture in the 1920s, there was a lot of condescension and contempt, if not, if you like, forms of racism towards Slavic, Russian, Eurasian cultures. And just as The Magic Mountain is based in the Germanic world, Olga Tokarczuk sets her novel in a Polish sanatorium. She sets it in the Slavic world. It has a variety of Slavic characters, which in a way also play with some of the Slavic characters in The Magic Mountain. Pia, Klavdia, but I think also picks up on the Slavic female folkloric and lower class stories that also become central drivers of this health resort horror story. So this health resort horror story, the Empusium, I think really does bring into focus some central questions of gender, power, horror and history. It explores, I think, the question of how we shape ourselves through stories. She says on page 53, narrator says on page 53, all these matters absorbed his mind, that's Mieczysław, drawing the world inside into the large chaotic space that each of us carries within, like an invisible piece of luggage that we drag after us all our lives without knowing why, our true self. In a sense, the Empusium is a brilliant Bildungsroman, a novel of development, the artistic development, if you like, the self-development, a Bildungsroman of psychological integration rather than artistic heroism. I think it is a brilliant novel. I haven't fully finished reading Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain, so I can't say yet whether it is a better novel than The Magic Mountain, but I absolutely think it is a brilliant read for you or your next book club. So do read it and subscribe to jeffrich.substack.com, the Burning Archive Substack, and as a paid subscriber you'll get access to my profiles of every single one of 121 winners of the Nobel Prize for Literature since 1901, the Nobel Archive, and that gives all sorts of insights into world literature and history and lots of ideas for what next you can read to get a bit of a different perspective on the world and dip into this great Polish novelist Olga Tokarczuk's book, The Empusium, a health resort horror story.